Now, concerning spiritual gifts, brothers and sisters, I do not want you to be uninformed. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. It's good to be away. It's good to come home. It's good to be home at St. Peter's after 2 weeks away. As many of you know, my family and I, during our time away, were on vacation. Part of that time was in Dubai, which is part of the United Arab Emirates, which is the right-hand side of the Arabian Peninsula in the Middle East. And while we were in Dubai, one of the things we got a chance to do, we stayed with friends, we toured the city, but one of the things we had a chance to do was to learn to see not just the modern city, and it is a very modern city, but to hear a little bit of the history of the city and its people and how it came to be what it is today. And that was a good experience. One of the things we learned, today Dubai is a city of many skyscrapers, a modern transit system, broad highways that make the New Jersey Turnpike look like a garden lane, hospitals, universities, and most of it is less than 20 years old. Much of it is less than 10 years old. And 5 years from now, it will look again little like it looks today because the growth continues. So it is a place that is very modern, technology everywhere, cutting edge technology. But it's a place that is still aware of its past. And one of the things I was really struck by that really helped me enjoy the city and understand the city to the extent I was able to do that in a week, that anybody could do that in a week, was that they are very aware of where they have come from and who they are, and how these new things and how this growth relates to who they have always been. 100 years ago, Dubai was a small regional trading outpost. It was on important trade routes connecting Arabia with the rest of the Middle East and Asia and Africa and the Mediterranean. It was a place of trade. It was a hub. And locally, their local industry included some subsistence farming and living off of the trade and hospitality, but also pearl diving. They were on the water, which for people whose lives for many generations have been in the desert, to live near the water, it means something very special and dear, and they made the most of that because they are on the Arabian Sea. Opposite them is Persia, Iran. And pearl diving, as well as a little fishing, was part of the local economy for generations and generations. And in the Dubai Museum that the city runs, there are sort of mannequins. Some of you may remember in New York City, the American Museum of Natural History would have these sort of tableaus, and they would have mannequins of cavemen and such. But in Dubai, at the Dubai Museum, they had pictures and sort of mannequin displays of pearl divers, and they would have on white suits that covered their head and their whole body, much like we might have a black rubber wetsuit today. They had these white suits that covered their heads and part of their face and all of their limbs and their torso, but they were cloth. They even had little pieces of wood that were sort of a spring that looked like an old-fashioned clothespin. Not the kind with the pins, but the kind that your mother had before that they could do this with. And they learned to be pearl divers. They had to learn to put on this outfit, to use the nose pin, but then to go down underwater for 2 minutes at a time and more to bring back the pearls. And as much as trade was important to them, this was part of the local economy that helped them add something to the economy and live off of it. And then in the 1950s, by the 1950s, you've heard the term cultured pearls and Mikimoto and Japanese pearls, and by the middle of the 20th century, cultured pearls from Japan became the thing in the world of pearls, and Dubai was left behind. Dubai was left behind. And part of how they had always supported themselves and how they'd always understood themselves faded because of changes in the world around them. People who lived by the water who were pearl divers and fishermen, many of their houses were of palm fronds. They would be framed with wood of the palm trees, and then they would have mats woven together of palm fronds, making the walls, much as we would use sheetrock, and covering the roofs. And people who lived in town away from the water would have stick-built wooden houses that were simple. But things that they knew sort of slipped out from under their feet because the world changed. And the cultured pearl industry changed the world pearl market. And they had to figure out what to do. Now, very luckily for them, within a decade, people who lived in Dubai and some people in Britain discovered oil, which took a lot of pressure off. And they became an oil country. And one of the things their leaders asked, first themselves and then in discussion with the people, and I'm sure in their prayers, is what will become of us with these changes? At first we interpreted this as the loss of pearls and part of our livelihood. But what are the things that have always been true of us as we face this new chapter? Well, we still have our location as a crossroads. We have 1,000 or more years history of being traders. Hospitality runs very deep in our culture, and it has for dozens of generations. And now we have oil money. We could either have a big flash in the pan of this, or we can take these things that we recognize as truest and best about ourselves, and even as the world changes around us, stay true to the things that are best in us and let go of the things that have stopped working, including the pearl industry. The pearl industry became a museum exhibit instead of a leading livelihood for the people of the city. And today, Dubai is in many ways physically unrecognizable. There are skyscrapers everywhere, a modern transit metro system, taxis, internet supreme. In America, many of the skyscrapers are rectangles. In Dubai, they said that's too confining. And they have buildings, they have one skyscraper that's shaped like a sailboat. It's called Burj Al Arab. Burj means tower, the Arab tower. Another one is called Burj Khalifa. Khalifa is was the grandfather of the ruler who helped envision this future and lead his people into it. And it's this needle-shaped building, but it's really a series of blocks and dog-leg turns in straight lines, so that it's not just all straight lines. It's a really striking place that just shouts imagination and courage. And oil wealth, to be fair. But I really loved this way that in Dubai, they were learning to tell their story of going from a trading post and pearl diving to this modern marvel. And I really respect that they asked some very deep human questions. The things that we are used to, are familiar with, some of the things we received from our ancestors have stopped working. The world around us has changed and undermined their relevance or cut into their effectiveness. And we're not getting the same results from doing the old things anymore. We need to rethink. And those are very deep human questions that every culture, every family, every group, every church faces again and again across time. I admire the way they ask these very deep human questions. So what does all this mean for us as children of God, as followers of Jesus Christ? What do we learn from this? The gospel today is the wedding at Cana. Jesus turns water into wine. When there was not enough, God made enough. I don't think it's any coincidence. I don't find it surprising in the least that Jesus' first public miracle happened at a wedding. A place of the union of man and woman, the love of two people, the love of families and neighbors, the love between God and his beloved children are celebrated and on display It's not shocking to me or surprising at all that Jesus' first miracle was at such a place of relationship, and that his first miracle is about God providing. As children of God, we will always be in the midst of a changing world. Things that used to work will stop giving us the same results. Things we relied on for material support may come and go. But the things that last, learning to ask the questions about what are the things that are truest and best of us, these deep human questions, are always with us. And that we look at these questions and we listen for the answers in God's Holy Spirit, remembering always that we are God's beloved children at the feast he has set for us. We live in the feast that God has set for us. It's not surprising at all that Jesus' first miracle was a wedding feast. The world changes. There are certain things about us individually, about our families, about St. Peter's as a church, about the towns we live in, that are deepest and truest, that we rightly seek to listen for God's voice about how those things will remain true, even as we adapt to changing circumstance. Change is scary and hard and almost, change can feel like loss and be a source of anxiety. A certain portion of that may be inevitable in us as human beings. But the good news of Jesus Christ is that anxiety, there's nothing inevitable about that anxiety governing our lives or governing our decisions or limiting God's love for us. The gospel of Jesus Christ and his wedding miracle at Cana, the water and the wine, reminds us that we are always at the feast God has set for us as his beloved children. And even as the familiar comes and goes, we can adapt, we will adapt, always in the setting of God's ongoing feast for us. When we come to this altar, share the bread and wine, some of you may have noticed that each week as we go through the offertory and come into the rite of the Eucharist, I will say, this is the feast that God has set for us. It's with us always. It's in the Eucharist, it's in the Scripture, it's in our life together. We are surrounded by the feast of God and God's abundance, even in the face of change. So what can we as followers of Jesus Christ and beloved children of God do about this? What is our place in this? Our first place in this is to trust in the love of God, to trust in the abundance of God, and respond first to God's abundance and love for us before we respond to our own fear or sense of scarcity when things are changing. The second thing that we can do is on the advice of Paul from this first letter to the church at Corinth. Now, concerning spiritual gifts, brothers and sisters, I do not want you to be uninformed. Now, there are a variety of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are varieties of services, but the same Lord. There are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who activates all of them in everyone. To each is given a manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. To no one is given through the Spirit. To one is given through the Spirit the utterance of wisdom. To another the utterance of knowledge, according to the same Spirit. To another faith by the same Spirit. To another gifts of healing by the one Spirit. To another the working of miracles. To another prophecy. To another the discernment of spirits. To another various kinds of tongues and the interpretation of tongues. All these are activated by the one and the same Spirit, who allots to each one individually, just as the Spirit chooses. What we can do as we take our place at God's table, at the feast God has set for us, is to open our hearts so that our gifts come out. That the gifts that God has placed within us come to their fullness, just as his love and abundance for us comes to its fullness. We each have our own gifts. Let us bring them joyfully to the table as children called to the family feast of God. For this we can say thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God.